Just want to thank you for coming out to our inaugural teen speaker series, the The Artist series, which essentially focuses on local artists with an intimate interview with one of our teen council members. Today, we are privileged to have the incomparable Tiff Massey with us. Give her a round of applause. We'll talk about her great accomplishments. As well as the host of the event, our teen council member, Matt Kasprowicz, and this is his brainchild. Give Matt a hand. A little bit of information on our two speakers today. Our host, Matt Kasprowicz, is a 17-year-old high school senior from the International Academy in West Bloomfield. Matt likes creative writing in the form of short stories and poetry. And while not a practitioner of the visual arts, he's drawn to them because of their critical and analytical perspective. In his own words, my interest in contemporary art stems from my belief in the importance of creation and expression. Matt Kasprowicz, everyone. Give him a round of applause. Our D artist, Tiff Massey, Detroit-based jeweler, sculptor, and designer. Tiff Massey works in the observation of class, race, and contemporary culture, viewed through the lens of African adornment and life in Detroit. She holds a BS from Eastern Michigan University and an MFA in metalsmithing from Cranbrook Academy of Art. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including South Africa, Belgium, the Netherlands, and most recently France. Tiff Massey is the recipient of the 2015 Kresge Arts Fellowship, as well as the Night Arts Challenge winner. Give Tiff Massey an applause, everyone. So without further ado, I give you the D Artist series, Matt Kasprowicz. Thank you.
All right, so to start, looking back, do you remember a moment or the moment when you knew that you wanted to be an artist and you knew that you wanted to pursue art professionally?
I think that was probably the last year that I had in pursuing a bachelor's in science. I was majoring in biology and a minor in chemistry. And I found myself breaking up the monotony of those classes to go to the jewelry studio. So I definitely knew then that I had the fever. I was in love with this metal, the techniques and things like that. So instead of changing my major, I just decided to roll with it, and thank God that I did. Because then I was able to support myself the year after when I was going back to pursue art. So that would be like 2004.
So did you have a creative upbringing? Was your family creative? Do you feel like there was one person in your youth that got you into art in general?
Interestingly enough, no. Like, my grandfather would draw comics for me when I would go over there frequently. Other than that, I guess my mother basically saw that there was some talent, and she would take me to CCS on the weekends, and she just exposed me to a lot of things as far as like art fairs and things that used to be really prevalent here in Detroit. So, but as far as other family members, no.
So when you were developing as a metalsmith and you were embarking on your artistic journey, do you remember one big challenge or the biggest challenge that you faced as a developing artist, or any hurdles you had to overcome?
Oh. Well, there's always challenges. I mean, my road to where I am today wasn't like, oh, I'm an artist, so I'm just going to pursue it, because I was doing biology and then just doing that transition. And it necessarily wasn't art for me, it was jewelry, just specifically. Growing up and, you know, in the 80s, and my siblings are older than me, and so it's like hip hop, you know. The jewelry was larger, big, and things like that, and then my father would go get custom jewelry made, and so that's particularly where my interest began, was with jewelry. And so it just sort of translated into not necessarily the commercial aspect, even though I was always looking at it. I was looking at Jacob the Jeweler specifically. Then we're talking about like 2000s when bling was, the term was branded, the jewelry still in large scale but full of diamonds. And so I was really intrigued by this, but I've never made jewelry that looked like that. I just took characteristics of that and applied it to my art form. But then once I was privy to contemporary art jewelry, which is huge in Europe. Right now it's Munich Jewelry Week, and that's when jewelers from all over the world, contemporary art jewelers specifically, assemble, and there's exhibitions. The museums put on exhibitions for, from artists from Japan and things like that. So it's a total takeover of the city with jewelry. So I don't know if I answered that. I kind of went on a rant.
Yeah. So starting out, was it hard for you to find a niche for your work, or did you, was it easy for you to place yourself as an artist?
I think it's interesting choosing jewelry and using jewelry as my canvas in America. Because I feel like when you think of jewelry, you think commercially, like gold and diamonds, and usually I feel like there's a conditioning of what jewelry is here. And so there are groups here called SNAG, Society of the North American Goldsmiths. They're not necessarily that large, but that's the only other assembly of jewelers. So it's, the genre is really just not that big here. But I'm interested in making several other things, well, everything. And so I have to tell myself to focus. But I moved into sculpture just because I wasn't satisfied with the scale of the jewelry that I was making. So
you'd say that have you shifted your artistic outlook over time? You mentioned sculpture, so that was a change for you?
Yes, I mean, that was just exploring at Cranbrook, and that was the beauty of that institution. It was that I had a chance to explore, and so this entire time I'm thinking, jewelry, functionality, body, and it's like, that's when I was able to see that, art could be any and everything, And so I wanted to explore that and see actually what that meant to me and my practice. So, I mean, I do installations now. I'm doing performance and making music. So it really just depends on what I'm talking about, directs the mediums that I'm going to use at that particular time. But jewelry is always, the work that unifies it all.
Okay, so I have some of your work up here. This is from your series Vanity. So could you describe this series a little bit? What were you thinking when you were creating it? Just a little bit of the process.
Okay, so Vanity was, basically my thought process behind it was Detroit, just growing up in Detroit, just me going back full circle on, designs and aspects of what really got me excited about making. And so the piece on the left is called Dookie, Dookie chains, rope chains. This is definitely a signifier of hip hop jewelry. Definitely 80s, so very nostalgic, but I wanted to make a contemporary version. And so the technique is a coil method that I was using in previous works that were done in fiber, and so I just translated it in metal. So the whole entire exhibition consisted of sculpture and jewelry. And it was basically set up as if you would put jewelry on and look at yourself in the mirror. Detroit, in my relation to jewelry, usually I make one-of-a-kinds because Detroiters don't want to look like anybody else. It's like when you go out on the weekend, I mean, it would be a serious problem if somebody has on the same outfit as you. So, you know, that's usually I try to keep true to that aesthetic, and you definitely want to be seen. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
In your work, when you're coming up with something original, when you're making something new, do you find yourself starting with the material and technical aspects of what you're working with, or do you start with your ideas and then try to fit your metal or your material to them?
I usually start with the idea, and then that determines my materials. And I don't necessarily have the luxury now to just play with materials, so it's just basically how can I manipulate these materials are fine materials that basically signify what I am trying to say, so I don't have to work so hard all the time. Yeah.
Okay, so we have some more work pulled up here. Your works have a sense of humor. What inspires that sense of humor? What are you thinking about when you're making jewelry?
Usually humor isn't a part of it, but you know, I think I am funny. But it usually takes you a minute to get to that because there's definitely several layers of seriousness before you get there. So this piece in particular, this series, I made this at Cranbrook, and I was making several penises. I never wanted to be that artist to make penises, but that's what happened. And so I was basically trying to figure out the right material to talk about what I was trying to convey. And so basically this is a necklace, and I wanted it to resemble a tie, but then you could also wear it around your waist as a belt. And basically I was dealing with themes of appropriation, but mostly body parts specifically. So when I started Cranbrook, I knew what type of work that I was going to make, I just didn't know how to do it particularly. So that's when I figured that I was, you know, developing my material language and what that is, and just trying to unify ideas with materials. So I came up with this piece. It's called Hung. Double meaning. I like duality. So usually the jewelry has double functions. You can either change it yourself on how you wear it. I like to give options to the collector.
Okay. This is another series of yours, Je ne sais quoi. And would you say that there's a thematic continuity in your work? It sounds like there's a thematic continuity in your work and the way that you work with the body and adornment. So could you talk a little bit about this work too?
Je ne sais quoi is body of work that's based on African hair traditions. And so these are all African hairstyles from particular tribes that suggest wealth. Like, you know, it's not the everyday woman that's going to have some of these hairstyles. I mean, they take a very long time, hours and hours, to create some of these pieces, and usually they're just signifiers of royalty. So why not apply that to jewelry? I mean, it's usually associated with wealth anyway. So I was working out these themes, and I mean, the underlying thing is, you know, just appropriation of African American culture. So hence why white models. And she has cornrows, but you can't really tell. You know, there's articles out recently where they were saying like Kim Kardashian is the originator of these new cornrows. But they're not using it as cornrows, they call it boxer braids. And I'm like, what is that? You know, there is no such thing as boxer braids, you know, there's cornrows, you know. So it's just like little, I mean, things like that, you know, from hair tattoos. And I've been getting designs shaved in my head for years. So it's just really interesting, you know, when culture gets Columbused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to you, what is the meaning of politics and identity in art? How do those two things interact, and how do they interact in your work specifically?
I think that's pretty much like what I deal with specifically. I think like in my journey to pursuing art, it wasn't until I had an African art class or African American art class that I realized there were African American artists, and I had to take a class. So then I knew that obviously my perspective is lacking. And so like I definitely wanted to talk about different themes that I was experiencing or just comment on contemporary times. So usually it just goes back and forth from Detroit, which is unavoidable because this is like, I grew up here, so everything that's happening is like in my living room. And then there's, you know, race relations. I mean, you see it all over the news now, so it's like I try not to necessarily get caught up and still stay true to the ideas and things that, you know, that are important to me, but sometimes things are just unavoidable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is your series, Detroit is What? So this is an example of your work taking broader forms than just jewelry and metalsmithing. So could you tell us a little bit about this project and what it means to you?
Yeah, this piece happened in 2010, and so I had the opportunity to work with Allied Media Projects. And so they had several artists from Cranbrook do installations here at MOCAD. Mm-hmm. And so me and several friends got tons of cardboard, made all of these boxes that had all of the alphabets on it. So we wanted people to interact with the boxes and spell out what they felt Detroit was. Mm-hmm. And this was 2010. So, you know, so much has happened since 2010 in relation to Detroit. And so this is their annual party that they have here. And so tons of people came and, you know, they got their photograph taken, and then they were writing down what they actually felt Detroit was about. And so there's, I don't know how many images there are in the series, but a lot of the people in these images are the who's who of Detroit. So this series is definitely a representation of Detroit and a true representation.
Mm-hmm. So how do you feel about Detroit's resurgence as an art city? It's been both positive and negative. Could you tell us a little bit about how you exist in that sphere?
Oh, wow. So, I don't know, I kind of hate the word resurgence and new. Mm-hmm. Half of it because I feel like that it goes with a narrative that doesn't have anything to do with specifically the artists that have been here who have been invested in just making this a place where they want to expand upon their practice. So it just kind of makes it like this commercialized thing. I really feel like we need more criticism because there's just, everything is kind of like a free fall, like anything goes. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of people who just want to put Detroit label themselves as a Detroiter. And, 5 years ago, nobody would be caught dead trying to do that. I mean, so many brands are like popping up, like people are really trying to eat off of this. So I feel like it's more exploitive than anything. So, I mean, there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of new artists that have come to the city that are trying to make this their home. They're vested. And that's what we need. We don't need people who are invested.
Yeah.
Time out for that.
Okay. So speaking of taking your art taking broader forms, you've also explored music recently. What direction are you taking with that? How is that in work in contrast to your other work?
The music. So, music, because it travels quicker, then it can happen quicker. Sometimes I don't necessarily need to spend a month making a piece surrounded by the same ideas. And so my first track, that's so funny, is called Detroit is Black, and it's basically based off a writing that I did in 2014 called I See What You're Doing. And so I was able to collaborate with Wajid, who is another Kresge fellow. And being a Kresge fellow this year, we get to do a video, or they do a video to highlight the artist. And I didn't want to do the normal, sit down, hi, I'm Tiff Massey, this is what I do. That's boring. So I'm like, why don't I take this opportunity to make a music video? And so then in that, I was able to actually convey a lot of the ideas that I was working with the jewelry that I had in the video. So I feel like it's just another way of working, and definitely to get the ideas out quicker. I don't necessarily think, I think it's coming full circle. I mean, it's music, I'm doing kind of this spoken word rap thing, and then, I'm heavily influenced by hip hop, and so I'm probably gonna do a full album, but it's gonna be more visual based, because I'm an artist. A visual artist.
Yeah. Are there other areas of art that you draw on, either as inspiration or like backdrop for your work?
Between like fashion, sculpture, music.
Mm-hmm. Is there one particular aspect of your work that you'd like to draw people's attention to? Is there something you find is more important than other parts of your work?
It's all important, but at the end of the day, it's really all about the jewelry, whether you can wear it or you can't wear it or you can walk through it. So those are, definitely things that I'm thinking about, is how large can I make the jewelry? Yeah, because then that's really bling,
Yeah. So to you, what do you think is the most fulfilling part of being an artist? What do you find gives you the most life?
I don't know. Like every day I wake up in my studio and I'm just like, yes, just the fact that I have the luxury to be able to do this. But I like it. I like it because I like to make, I like to create, I like to share, I like to teach, I like to tell stories.
And so those are all things that you see as part of your outlook on art more broadly?
Yeah, and then I have a lot to say, and I feel like my perspective isn't heard. So yeah, it's like a lot of it. I feel like artists have a lot of responsibility, and responsibility once you have some sort of recognition, So I don't necessarily feel like the work is for me, or avenues that are being opened up necessarily are just for me. So once I get to a certain point, I mean, I'm coming back to actually really give back. So that's why I'm here. I like to support young adults, children, and so that's, where I want to get back to. So it might be, a Tiff Massey school or something of metal, coming soon, but yeah, I feel like it's all of that.
Mm-hmm. In a lot of those aspects, the art world's changing pretty fast nowadays. How do you see the future of art, and how do you see the future of projects like yours in an interdisciplinary sense? How do you see the development of that?
The future of art. I don't know. I mean, we have this digital age, so I feel like people can see a lot of art easier than they did before. I mean, like going to this specific location, so I feel like the future of art as far as like exposure is great. I feel like a lot of artists are able to see the fruits of their labor in their lifetime. I mean, they don't have to die to, be famous. If that's what people are, don't be an artist to be famous. Don't do that. You have to really want it. But I mean, I think the future is great. I think the more attention that art gets, maybe we can get, in our education system, art included again. Because I feel like in relation to the rest of the world, we're so behind in relation to how our cities, our governments support art and artists. When I went to France in September, I was a part of this exhibition called Lille 3000, and I've never been a part of anything so big in my life. Detroit was a guest, and there were also other cities, Brazil, Korea, and 2 other cities. And I feel like, millions of dollars had to go into this. They brought Carnival to France. Floats, every place that was a venue for art was transformed, and there were installations. And so it would be great to see something like that. It was like, the equivalent would be de-electricity mixed with the Thanksgiving Day parade, mixed with Design Week. It was amazing to see and actually be a part of. The mayor spoke like 3 or 4 times, and so many press and individuals came out. But what was interesting is nobody in Detroit covered that, and there were so many people, artists, representing Detroit in France.
So how do you see those types of projects being developed here, maybe locally in Detroit or also in the US? How do you think that those types of things should involve local communities and local artists?
How? I guess when we have people who are interested in funding the arts, that's probably how, or enough people who would like to assemble to try to attack these ideas. But it goes to this thing, if you don't have art and teach people that art is important or that being a priority, how do you come up with committees to do these things? I don't know.
So are there things that you take issue with in the art world today? Seeing as you obviously have experience with different types of, or art in different settings, especially abroad.
Art is political. It's very political. In some places, not everybody can collect the work. It's specific because the artwork needs to belong in certain collections for it to be like a thing. So, it's interesting, and it's different levels to art. And so it just really depends on what your trajectory is within it. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. If you weren't an artist today, what do you think you'd be?
A chef.
Is that the same source you think that'd be coming from?
I think
same
so.
inspiration?
I mean, I was exposed to food. My dad owned restaurants, Coney Islands. And so we would have battles on who was like the better cook, you know. So I would have to say food. I mean, because even how I talk about food, I like to make vegetarian food. I'm not a vegetarian. But I like to break down the materials so it'll taste good. And so I feel I like that. And I like to bake as well. I was going to start a cookie company a couple years ago. And so I'm baking, you know, trying to figure this out. And then a friend of mine was like, yo, like I have a hookup at Whole Foods. Do you want the connect? And so I'm like, hell yeah. But then I'm thinking like, no. I mean, it would totally take me away from what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's making this art. So that's what it is. But a chef, I would totally be chefing. It might be some pop-ups coming up, just so you know.
All right. So this is from your series, Work It Boy. Dick weights?
Dick weights.
Okay.
Yes. So this is back at Cranbrook, and so I'm just basically trying to find the materiality to basically talk about these ideas. And so I got a chance to do an iron pour. And so these are all made out of iron. And they're very phallic in nature, but the thing about them is the ends of the piece are how metal stakes are made. So if you want to forge metal, a lot of the tools, the standard of how you hook these things into vices to shape, form metal around these objects, I've added that to the dicks.
So how does this series work in the context of your themes of adornment and jewelry in general? Like
Well,
the
I
body?
think, you know, when it comes to like interacting with the body, I mean, really it should have been a video of him like really working out with this, or just like running down the street. You know, I think that would have been probably taking it to the next level. I just think at the time it was just like, okay, what's the right language to suggest what I'm trying to talk about? And so what I was gonna do was make this really large chain where you can actually like interchange the tools as if you would do, as if you're gonna raise bowls out of metal. So yeah, so I was basically trying to connect, you know, these two ideas, tools.
So what kind of politics do you find in the body and in jewelry, in adornment?
I mean, I don't necessarily find any politics in it. I usually put the politics in it, so, and that just really depends on what I'm trying to talk about at the time. But no, yeah.
So what sort of artists have inspired you, or what non-artists do you take inspiration from? Is your work, do you draw on other people's work in your own work, or do you find that certain ideas have really influenced you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely inspired. Like, I used to joke around when I was in grad school, like, you know, Issey Miyake and Nick Cave are my baby daddies. So, like, I really respected their craft, and I feel like, oh, and Martin Purrier. So we have sculpture, we have performance, fiber, and then we have fashion. And so, like, I feel like that's where I am. I'm all those things, and so I really respect those, their craft and how they've built their brand, and so I'm very inspired by all of them, and their works are just amazing. So if you're not familiar, please check them out.
So is there any other type of art that you'd like to expand into, or any skills you would like to develop, or wish you, like if you weren't working with jewelry and metalsmithing, what other area of art really interests you?
Probably fiber.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely fiber.
Let's see.
But where I want to go, I want to come from Marc de Souveraud. I want to make jewelry as large as his pieces, to where people can interact in a different way, walk in and out some of these pieces and structures. So I don't know. I want more from public art world personally. So I think you'll probably see more of that from me coming soon.
So are there any ideas that you've had as an artist that you haven't been able to realize, and why?
I mean, large-scale sculptures, funding, space to make it. You need a team, essentially, to make sculptures at that scale. So these are all things that I'm working on, but that would be probably the only limitations for them to be, not realized. So support in all those areas.
If you could have a conversation with anyone, dead or alive, who would they be?
Shit. Dead or alive? Martha Stewart. Yeah, Martha Stewart and probably Oprah. And that's just really on some business. Like, I really respect Martha Stewart, and I know it is funny, because you probably wouldn't think that based on any of the things that I make. But yeah, I find that her hustle is amazing. I mean, she makes pretty much any and everything. So, I mean, and based off craft. I mean, she's teaching, or was teaching, stay-at-home moms how to craft and decorate their homes, to like making this like multi-million-dollar industry based off of design and craft. And so that is interesting to me. And Oprah, because she's Oprah. Who else? Probably like Faith Ringgold. I really respect her work, and probably like Augusta Savage. I would really like to know what that perspective was, especially like Augusta Savage, like to just have to, bounce from, the United States, or, just deal with, America in those times that necessarily wasn't supportive to Black artists. So just things like that.
Mm-hmm. So looking back on your career and what you've achieved so far, is there anything that you feel you'd change?
Yes. Probably my circle. Usually, my circle, my network, all of that has definitely changed, and it's all, geared to the future of what I'm trying to do. Mm-hmm. Not to say that anybody that's not in this particular field or business-wise, we're not hanging out, but I really feel like that definitely has changed how I think about things, as far as business or artistically, definitely changed. I'm definitely a lot more confident, and I feel like there's definitely a lot of confidence that I possess in general, but just looking back, it probably wasn't as much as it is now.
So what did you find was important for you as a developing artist, or what do you think is important for developing artists in general?
Having a support system. Yeah, people who believe in you, people who whether it's, financial, or coming taking you out of the studio because you're going crazy, to sharing networks.
Where do you see yourself 30 years from now, or in the future?
30 years. It's like I barely know what's happening next week. 30 years, hopefully the school will be realized. So what I'm working on right now is trying to find a facility so I can do my large-scale sculptures. My studio right now, I'm making jewelry, so it's small scale, and I'm transitioning it to a residency specifically for jewelers. So I need another space to do those things, but if the space is large enough, then I would have already obtained a space for classes to actually happen. So that's something that I want. I want a school, and hopefully I can have like multiple studios, one somewhere in the Caribbean, and probably Europe and Detroit. So there's like, I don't know. I feel like that would be awesome.
Do you think it's important for artists to have specific ambitions? Do you work methodologically? Do you do a lot of planning in your work?
Sometimes and sometimes not. It just really depends on what the deadlines are, what I'm working towards, what's going on. What was the first question that you asked?
Is it important for artists to have specific ambitions in what they're doing in their work?
I think it's definitely important. I mean, you have to know like what you want to do with this art. I mean, who's your audience? Where you want to go? Where do you want to take it? And then pursue that. Because it's definitely not about people looking at you and recognition. I mean, that's nice, but at the end of the day, like the work needs to be made. It needs to be good. Yeah.
So as an artist, how do you relate to viewers of your work? How do you make sure that you're communicating what you want to be communicating? Or how do you relate to someone who's looking at your work but doesn't communicate with you in other ways?
I don't know. I mean, really you really can't control that. Like I can control like the signifiers that people pick up to basically come to my idea. But everybody has so many different life experiences, they're gonna have a take on it regardless of the artist statement or not. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you can try to control it as much as possible, but it's so many unknowns and variables that are involved. And then to me, as a contemporary artist, I feel, aesthetically, like the work needs to be good and powerful in the meaning. And usually you don't have both in artwork that's happening now. Or you just have it where it's just really aesthetically about what it looks like,
So speaking broadly, what does art mean to you?
Art is everything, and it's really a lifestyle. It's not necessarily, I guess that's why you call it a practice. It's a lifestyle. You can't really separate it from yourself, I found. It's not like it's a 9 to 5 and then you put it down and you're not an artist anymore. Because you're constantly working when you don't think that you're working,
So when you're creating, when you're working, are there experiences that you draw on particularly in your life? Are there elements in your personal life that you feel are channeled into your artwork?
Yeah, because I feel like now looking back on all of the penis work, I don't necessarily think it was about appropriation. I think it was about my interactions with men. So, yeah.
All right.
So like I don't necessarily have like anything that is like particularly happening per se. Detroit, is a common theme that's seems to be happening, or that's what I'm currently talking about in the new work that I'm making right now. And that's just a continuation of the body of work that I took to France, entitled What Up Doe? So it was about like me telling the truth, a different perspective, because the name of the exhibition was entitled Renaissance, and so they wanted to talk about how Detroit is the new Renaissance, the narrative that I really don't like. Yeah.
So do you encounter a lot of this narrative in your interact? Like, how do you deal with it on a day-to-day basis? Like, what do you?
On a day-to-day basis, I really just try to mind my business, you know? But every time it seems like I walk out of the house, I get someone who is new to Detroit who wants to talk about how great it is. And it's so nice. And look at all the things that are happening, and it's so better than before, when they have no context of what the before is and what the change actually really is. And it's a lot of like smoke and mirrors, until they, you know, are here for a couple years and they're like, shit, like, man, I don't like these other new people that are coming in doing the same thing. So it's interesting to like have conversations of people who were new 3 years ago and are living here now, and they find the same things problematic that I did, but didn't understand it when they were new to the city. So, you know, the new conversation, you know, Detroit isn't new to me, it's new to you, you know. And so just like any place would be if you're going to explore it, but I mean, to act like you know about it is, I think, is something different.
So have your ideas about Detroit changed? What has your relationship to the city been over your lifetime?
It's kind of like a love-hate, and I think it's just basically like what's going on now, because I feel like the changes that are being made in Detroit aren't necessarily for the people who live here, and so then that becomes like very problematic. I mean, I think it's great that you have a lot more interest in art and what's going on, and that's great, and that totally benefits me and other artists and future artists, that all of this energy is surrounded by the arts and it can only grow. But then, you know, that's just beautiful shit at the end of the day, because it's real life things that are happening. And so I just feel like the real narrative is not being talked about, it's just being like slipped under the rug, pretty much.
Are you involved with current conversations about in the city, in public policy, or in just the media?
No, you know, I like to joke, like yesterday, I'm like, I should run for mayor. But then I wouldn't make any artwork. So I don't know, I really try not to be involved, but usually when I go to a lot of these panels or discussion, I'm the only representative of the city. And so then, you know, people who are basically have this particular agenda of like capitalizing on this newness usually have a problem with my perspective, you know?
Yeah. So as a closing question, I'd just like to ask you what advice you'd give to aspiring artists. Like what would you say are the important things to focus on as a developing artist, as a young artist, as someone who is looking to make a career, or as someone who just wants to create artwork?
Well, I would definitely say focus. If you already identify as an artist and you know what you want to do, I would say focus and give it all that you got. I mean, there's an artist born every day, and they're all your competitors, so it's like it's only, like you have to want it. It's not about any A's or grades or going to like that great school, like you really have to really want it. And make as if nobody is looking, you know? Because a lot of times they're not checking for you. So, you know, it's not the easiest job in the world. I mean, you have to be a business person as well as the creative. So, and it's really a lot about time management. So, if you can like cut out distractions and you're really into something, like really pursue it. I say network, and find mentors, talk to people, ask about their experiences, write to artists that you admire, see if you can be an apprentice. I mean, that's only things that can help you. I mean, it could be an artist that works in something that's totally different than you. So I would definitely say, you know, explore, but definitely work hard. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.